Hello, folks. Can you hear me okay? If you can take a moment to get seated, we'll kick off our presentation today. The first thing I'll say is wearing this jacket is not a full choice of mine, but it's tied in with the AWS certification challenge. So if you're looking to educate yourself on AWS certifications, whether that's machine learning or solution architecture, it's a really great way to learn hands-on how the AWS cloud works. So I'm going to kick things off. My name is Jonah Craig, and I work as a startup solutions architect here in Ireland. And I have the absolute privilege of working with customers like Sonrai Analytics. And we support startups, whether they're like two people in their parents' basement or garage, all the way up to startups who have scaled to 100 or 200 plus employees. So it's really good fun. And again, Sonrai have been on that journey, and it's been great to support them through last year and this year. So we like to take the most cutting edge and really bring it to you today from an AI/ML perspective. Why I love working with Sonrai? For two really key reasons. The first is they're using AWS technology to reduce cancer drug trial times. I'm sure many of us in this room, including myself, had cancer affect their lives in some shape or form, whether through family or friends. And I know every day when I have a meeting with Jared or Matt, it's extremely motivating to get stuck in and help them grow because they're bringing efficiencies into the healthcare system. I also love working with them because from a technology perspective, what they're doing is truly cutting edge. From a startup team, you don't have unlimited resources, and you really need to leverage things like AWS managed services. And I'm going to let them talk through that and break that down. So my job today is to set a framework, if you like, for machine learning and make it simple. And you can use this framework to listen to their side of the story. So the machine learning loop, when we break this down to a foundational concept, we start with data preparation, arguably the most important part about any machine learning problem. It does not matter if you have the most cutting-edge algorithms. The data really is everything. So making sure you've got access to data and making it machine learning friendly is key. We then move on to model training, okay? So this is where we select a model, and we want to take that data that we have and start training it. So the expensive part of machine learning, and cost optimization really is a key part to this. And then when we're ready and we've picked the optimum model, we can deploy that into production and monitor it, okay? So we can talk about things like model drift, which may mean over time, maybe the data that's coming in is slightly different to what it was trained on. And this is where the secret sauce kind of comes in, which is orchestration, MLOps, okay? And our Amazon SageMaker service encapsulates this loop. So if you're building a machine learning problem, you can do all of this and chain it all together. And Sonrai, again, have these efficiencies in place. And what they can do with a small team is just breathtaking. I'm going to outline as well the key high-level challenges for Sonrai. The first one is data storage. So Sonrai Analytics are in the healthcare life science space, and they're taking this foundational model trend and really bringing it to this space in this vertical. So they're dealing with petabytes of data. So ensuring that they've got an effective cost management system for that is crucial, and also to be able to handle that scale is key. They're also training and hosting their own foundational models, which is, again, extremely cutting edge. They're using services such as SageMaker to help with this, but I'm going to let the guys dive deep into how they're actually doing this. And then finally, scaling to meet business demand. It's really, really important. If you're a startup or an enterprise, you need to be able to scale your technical architecture to be able to meet customer demand. And again, Sonrai can do that. If they have a big enterprise client, or whether it's new startups joining their system, they can do that because they've architected it in the correct way. So you'll hear a lot today about our AWS services, okay? And today we're going to focus a bit on SageMaker, so keep that in mind through their presentation. And we have a whole host of AI services, okay? So we've got Amazon Health-Omics here, which, again, it applies mostly to the HCLS space. However, no matter your vertical, whether you're in fintech or anything like this, there are AI services there that can do a lot of the heavy lifting of AI in the back end, okay? So I just wanted to paint that in case you're maybe not in the HTLS space, but there's a lot of things that you can take away from our service stack. So let's talk a little bit about SageMaker before I hand over. Again, if you keep that model machine learning loop in mind, you can see SageMaker Studio takes care of everything from data preparation all the way through to the deployment of the model. And what's really helpful is that it is designed for a whole host of people using the service. So ML engineers or data scientists, they can all collaborate in one place, which really helps efficiencies because you're not using, say, 20 third-party services for each part of this process. Again, the result can be like Sonrai, the way that they handle this. From an AWS architecture standpoint, I get asked all the time, like, this sounds great, but how do I actually get started with something hands-on that I can build for my own company? So again, I always point people in the right direction. The best place to start is with a workshop. Get hands-on. And this QR code will take you to the SageMaker Immersion Day. And this, again, we've got examples of if you want to just maybe experiment for your first time with SageMaker, or you want to build a pipeline and orchestrate a whole end-to-end solution, get started. We have, we then encourage you to build a POC on your side, and we have AWS partners. I'm sure you've heard a lot about them today. So again, don't be afraid to engage them. They've done these problems before, and they can help you deliver them and teach your team. So again, really fast way to do it, and then straight into production. So I wanted to set the scene for Sonrai. I'm going to introduce Dr. Matthew Alderdice, who is the head of data science. And it's been a pleasure working with you, Matt, and I'll leave it to you.
Afternoon, guys. You can hear me great. OK. So I'm going to set the scene a little bit more than what Jonah's done. Thank you so much for the introduction and also the invitation to present. So we're doing a double act today. I'm doing the data science, and my colleague Jared's doing the engineering. We're both sides of the same coin, okay? And I can't do my job without him, and vice versa. I build the ML, I'm extracted away from the infrastructure, and Jared essentially does the plumbing for us so that we can get access to data and train our models. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what we do and why we do it and how we do it. But first off, I'll give you a little bit about myself and my path to data science. I actually originally started as a molecular biologist in the lab about 10 years ago, so I was probably looked a little bit more like a mad scientist. I wasn't a gold jacket, but it was a long white one. I did test tubes and mixing reagents, and I worked in a precision medicine lab. Back then, there was a lot of new technologies about sequencing DNA, proteins, and so on. And what happened about 2015, which coincides with the advent of AI and NVIDIA technologies and so on, is that we were generating so much data that the bottleneck wasn't the generation, it was the analysis and the utilization of it. So I then transitioned into what's called bioinformatics, which is really just a subset of data science within the health field. So I joined Sonrai about 5 years ago, and we've been building AI products ever since. So now we can dive into Sonrai. So Sonrai is a Queen's University spin-out in Belfast. It was a fairly long drive down today, up early, but it's great to be down here. And what we've developed is a number of different algorithms hosted on AWS platforms for our clients. Our clients are developing drugs to treat cancer. And within precision medicine, the important thing is who should get the drug. You don't give everyone the same drug, because drugs can't be toxic, and there's no point in giving a drug to a patient if they're not going to respond. So identify new markers to apply the right treatment, and we're helping develop diagnostics or digital diagnostics using AI, ultimately to enable our clients to save patient lives. So that's Sonrai. Why do we do it? Precision medicine includes a lot of different disease types, but one of the main ones that we focus on is cancer. I don't think I need to tell everyone in the room that cancer is bad. Okay, it's very unpleasant. 1 in 2 people will develop a cancer incident in their lifetime. Hundreds of thousands of people die across the UK and Ireland every year. But as I said on the previous slide, there are a lot of organizations developing therapies to help patients. And the amount of data that they're generating in the lab is very amenable to AI. There's a lot of digital transformation happening across biotech and right through to healthcare, and we're here to help. So I'm going to spotlight a use case focusing on computer vision, a little bit like the previous talk, but frame it in the business context, and then dive into the AWS tech stack that we actually used, right from training through to machine learning, or the inference, sorry. And I'm going to pass over to my colleague Jared, who's going to spotlight some of the engineering challenges behind that as well. And it's also going to really tie in nicely with the training loop, which Jonah highlighted as well. So this particular use case, I'll actually point to the images first that you can see. So the top image there is actually a microscope, a glass slide of a patient's cancer. This is colon cancer. It's a glass slide, and for a long time it was what we refer to as analog. You looked down a microscope, the pathologist would be able to say, okay, there's tumor. They would get a Sharpie pen, literally a Sharpie pen, draw on the glass slide and say that's where you need to extract your DNA from, or your RNA, or whatever it is, so that you can have a test on your diagnosis. But we're now starting to scan these slides, so they're digitized. They're really large images. They're pyramidal TIFFs. You can see from the image below. But because they're now digitized, it's amenable to AI, and we can essentially replace that Sharpie pen with our own AI-generated proposed, so it's called a region of interest. This is important for a number of reasons, because pathologists are scarce. There's actually fewer and fewer pathologists as we go through time, and they're very expensive. It's about $100 per slide there, and you'll see that as the AI that we apply is incredibly cost effective. So that's the business challenge. We asked ourselves, can AI help with this? Spoiler alert, it can, but technical requirement is, can we train a model entirely within AWS, detect cancer from these large images, and assist pathologists? Now, we work in a regulated environment. We're one of a few companies building AI as medical devices. So assist is an important word there. We're not replacing pathologists. And the business output of this is to save millions in operational costs. If there's hundreds of thousands of those images and you're paying pathologists $100 a go, it mounts up. So what was the strategy? We started with the minimum amount of patients that we could really work with to generate a feature extractor and generate a model. So we had to ingest a large data set. 2,000 patients is actually quite a lot. I know that in other domains that's a very small number, but 2,000 patients is actually quite hard to get hold of. Then we had to automate the data preparation. So this data came from the lab. We automate that, and then we enter that training and evaluation loop, and we iterate. And once the model reaches a sufficient performance, then we can deploy it within a user workflow. And that's the important part. A model on its own is not useful. It has to be in an adoptable workflow for clinicians to use. And ultimately, what we got out of this was a model which outperforms our competitors, which is great. It's scalable cloud-native deployment, so we can actually scale to meet the needs of healthcare. So it's not one patient at a time. We can scale using serverless compute to go across thousands of patients. The turnaround time, Jared's actually going to speak to. We've got some really impressive metrics there, as well as the cost savings for clients. But now I'm going to spotlight. This is an AWS conference, so I'm going to speak to some of the technology behind our training. So remember, these are precision medicine labs, so the training data actually comes from these pathology instruments. We set up an Amazon SFTP. It lands in S3, and then Jared's team have an event-driven architecture in place, which uses Lambdas to extract the metadata from these really large images so that they can be viewed by pathologists. So our machine learning pipelines are a little bit different from other domains in the sense that pathologists have to be able to look at the images before they can go to the next stage. So a human in the loop is really important. You might need 10 pathologists, 1,000 pathologists looking at different images. We're also going to talk through some of the really cool Lambda-based architecture or use of Lambdas for viewing these images, these really big images. The next step on the data preparation side is tile extraction. So you saw tiles within those images. You cannot pass this single image, these large images, through a GPU. They're just too big. So what you need to do is tile them up or chunk them up. And the pipelines that we actually originally started with on-premise was incredibly slow. We've used cloud-native technology. You can instantiate thousands of instances so that it's done in hours instead of days or even months. And that's the data preparation side. The data then lands on S3. We use Fargate tasks orchestrated by ECS to do that. And then the data is ready for us to start training, and the ML team can get stuck in. In terms of, we have our Docker images for training parked on ECR, and we use SageMaker for our training jobs. We did have an on-premise solution which we utilized a lot, but I don't think I need to tell people why using the cloud is really important for scalability. But it means that we didn't have queues of machine learning engineers waiting for GPU access. And at a startup, that's really important. We can also scale down our use of compute as needed. We can scale our experimentation, we get our metrics, we output our model back to S3. One of the things that we're looking to do is move to the model registry as part of SageMaker. We do have our own artifactory on S3 to handle the nuances of what we do, and because we build medical devices, it's just about timing to move towards embracing some of the new features in SageMaker. So the model performance, once it's reached that stage, there's a lot of rigor that goes into training some of these models. We follow the FDA's GMLP, so good machine learning practices. We have to involve people right from oncologists, machine learning engineers, doctors, even nurses and survivors, where we get input about the sign-off of the performance of this model. Once that's done, we can start to get ready for production. And this is where our inference comes into play. So our S3 model artifact, approved for production, it's baked into an inference container. It sounds like common sense, but we are not allowed to have any training logic in our inference containers whatsoever. Most people would not, but we're actually mandated by the regulatory bodies that that cannot happen. There can be no superfluous logic in there in the inference container, so we have to have a separate one. That's hosted on ECR, it's built, and that's when I start to, from my perspective, our team start to think about handing over to Gerard, where his team will ship this out, ship the code. CDK is used for the infrastructure. We have blue-green deployments, so we can bring one application down and wait for the other. And we use serverless compute, so Lambda triggers and the Fargate ECS, Fargate tasks orchestrated by ECS. We are going to be moving to inference on SageMaker. Those tasks do not have GPU yet. We want GPUs so that we can further improve the turnaround time, so SageMaker is what we'll be doing for inference, our serverless compute as well. The final part is monitoring. That's very important to me as well. I've greatly simplified all of the infrastructure in place for that. That's not just CloudWatch, but it's a really good place for us to hone into. We need to understand the usage patterns of our algorithms, and Jonah mentioned model drift metrics. So if we start to see a jump from 20% cancer incidence to 40%, it might tell us that there's something wrong. We need to go to the lab, understand if something has changed with the data that's being produced. All of these insights allow for next iterations and training a more robust model. So that's a really good segue for me to hand over to Gerard, my counterpart, who's going to talk about the engineering challenges around what we do.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jonah. I'm Gerard Loughran. I lead the engineering team. That's a team of cloud engineers, full stack, and quality assurance engineers. As Matt said, we basically handle the plumbing, which is the data engineering and the infrastructure that underpins the AI and machine learning analysis. And I'm going to spotlight how we use AWS at a high level, what we provide to our customers. We build our own algorithms, but our main job is actually giving pharma and biotech the tools for them to develop drugs, for them to develop new treatments. So our primary use cases that we deploy was called the trusted research environment. That is a prepackaged cloud environment that allows them to have all their tools, all their data, all their users in a regulated environment. That's really important to Sonrai. Our infrastructure is heavily dictated by things like GDPR, things like how we handle patient data. And it was a big reason why we also picked AWS, so that we can use certified data centers and where we can trust that our data will be protected. Our customers are seeking to discover new cancer drugs, new treatments. They want to develop these models and algorithms. They want to typically take their data assets through the clinical trial so they can get to market. And we cover the full end-to-end life cycle of that. And this means handling three sort of key areas. So on the discovery side, it's about how we actually analyze the complex data. It can be really big, really unwieldy. And unlike business data, it's way more varied. It tends to be messy. You tend to have very niche modalities that require completely different tools. And this forced us to look at a data mesh architecture and to look at a variety of different AWS services that suits each individual data type. So for example, Health Omics is very good at handling bulky data directly from lab instruments. It can use popular frameworks such as Nixflow, which is really important for handling all of the different types of data that can come out, whether it's tabular, genomic, protein, imaging-based data. We use Athena as an extremely powerful serverless query that we can build to run under analytics and our visualizations, and we can use Glue to handle things like ETL, converting CSV to Parquets. And typically, as a general process, we need to take large, bulky data that, for example, might be 100 gigabyte of raw data, which you then turn into 40 terabyte of working data, and then you end up with actually surprisingly small CSVs and Parquets, which is resolved. And that's where you can make analytics and findings, but you need to link it all together. You need traceability, and you need to have an auditing, basically, so that we can know the full history of what happened to this data, that we can know the proper process was carried out, because ultimately patient safety is at risk. After we make our discoveries and handle our data, we now want to develop it. So Sonrai and our customers make a lot of use of SageMaker and SageMaker notebooks. We can use that to directly hook into other AWS services, including running LLMs. But our primary use is spinning up applications, training and tuning models, and preparing new drugs, treatments, or algorithms for eventual clinical release. On the deployment side, we have two use cases. Our customers need to deploy the things they build, so we can give them an operational window where they can use things like API Gateway, Dockers, and AppSync, so they can spin up their compute, they connect their data sources. But also on a very practical level, we need to deploy across the world. We need to have a partner like AWS who has data centers that we can trust, and we can use AWS orgs to create a separate account for each and every client. It's fully segregated. We do not share anything. There's no risk of databases being coming across, people sharing compute. Every single customer gets a completely different instance. And we can use Control Tower to completely automate the deployment of it. We can monitor it remotely. We can move out updates. And we also use CDK, which is the Cloud Development Kit. And that lets us treat the cloud infrastructure the way we treat our JavaScript code. It's completely PR'd, it's completely controlled. We have absolute certainty of what version is going out and that each customer is using the correct version. Spotlighting some interesting challenges, and I think Emily did a great job pointing this earlier as well. There's going to be a lot of things that resonate with us. I'm going to walk through a real use case with a client who was looking to hold a petabyte or 1,000 terabyte of imaging data. These images are about 5 to 12 gigabyte each, and when you extract them, they're more like 50 gigabyte, so they get very unwieldy very quickly. And the big challenge with this type of data is you need both high availability and low cost, and those things are typically at the opposite ends of the spectrum. And the way that we handled that was to use S3's native lifecycle management. So we're able to very easily, by APIs as well as by automatically triggering after, say, 3 weeks of inactivity, we can cycle data between what we call hot, which is when it's an S3 standard. That's when a pathologist needs to view the image. They want to run model training. They want to execute algorithms, so we need it highly available. And then cold is kind of like having a cold storage where maybe you've already processed the data, but legally you need to hold it, or maybe you're not ready to analyze it, you want to batch it later. And a good way we like to think about this, it's very similar to a manufacturing term known as just-in-time, where when you have a physical warehouse, you don't want to hold inventory for the sake of it. You want to be very efficient about when you bring it in, about when you load it out. It's how you can make a significant amount of cost savings. And in this case alone, this led to $600,000 in savings just from holding the data. One of the first surprising things when I joined Sonrai was that the storage was going to be a bigger cost problem than compute, which I really did not see coming. But once we get into this scale, it really shows that. And interestingly, we could have made more cost savings because we could have got it down to 25 or 50 terabyte hot, and that again would have had a dramatic impact. Another interesting challenge that Sonrai faced when we were building our AI, soon-to-be CEI video medical devices, is that we were using an on-premise server, as Matt mentioned, and in order to handle this data, we need to pull the individual SVS or TIFF files, we need to extract the metadata, we need to pull out 500,000 to 600,000 individual tiles, store them, prepare them for training. It's just very computationally intensive, and we had a pretty expensive on-premise server, but ultimately we were just bottlenecked by CPUs and GPUs, and based on the current cadence, we were looking at a 6-month delay just to get the data ready, just to do the data preparation stage. So to get around this, we created an MVP cloud-native tile extractor. It was written in Rust, and it used lambdas and fargates. And the end result was that we basically just dumped all of the images into one S3 bucket. We set up an automation policy to then spin up an individual task for each image, and 6 months became 6 hours. It just iterated through the full list. It gave us everything we need. And on a practical level for Sonrai, it was the difference in meeting the deadline and failing. But it also means that us and our customers can now build these things 6 to 12 months faster. And this scales with the data. So the more data you have, the more this is more important. It was also incredibly cost effective, way cheaper than the cost of electric would have been to run our server. Another interesting challenge that Matt had mentioned was that we have to keep the human in the loop. So we can't just hold this data. It can't just be behind the scenes. And it would be a lot cheaper and efficient if it was just spinning up boxes in the back. We actually need to make it available. And Matt had mentioned about working in a lab. We essentially provide a digital microscope. So we need to make those images available on a web browser. And if you can imagine from the image in that, you can zoom left, you can zoom in and out, you can go left, up, down, right. And when you're doing that, you're essentially trying to view 50 gigabyte worth of imaging data. There's about 500,000 or 600,000 images. They're about 80 kilobytes each. We're also trying to avoid not having to store an extra 50, because then that 1 petabyte now becomes 10 petabyte by the time you fully extracted. So what we did was create a cloud-native image viewer, where we spun up thousands of Lambda invocations. We linked it up with AppSync for GraphQL querying to a JavaScript front end. And essentially, we are lazy loading and rendering. As we spin up a Lambda, it reaches in to the archive format, pulls out the tile that we need. We're not technically holding S3 storage. We're not even paying S3 costs on that, because it's just a temporary transfer in a live session. And the result is pretty much instantaneous. I can pan around. I'm lazy loading as I move around the screen. I'm only using the data that I need. It's entirely serverless. It's instantaneous as well. And it's also extremely cost effective. We're talking fractions of a penny for things like this to run over a couple of hours. And a big thing for Sonrai was as well that a lot of open source solutions to competitors, to get around this big data storage problem, they sacrifice image quality. They heavily compress the image, because how else do you get that amount of data on a server? We were able to completely avoid that. We don't remotely compress. We use the full original size image. And for us, that is the difference potentially between an AI correctly estimating whether you have lung cancer or not. So we had no sacrifice to quality, but we had instantaneous speed, and we avoided serious storage costs. This is now looping back to sort of Matt's key purpose about why we do this. I've worked in healthcare a long time. I used to build medical device software in hospitals as well. Healthcare basically has a scalability problem in a nutshell. There are constantly more and more patients. There's fewer doctors, there's fewer nurses, there's fewer pathologists. There's less money to go around per patient, and that is not going to get better anytime soon. So lots of companies like ourselves are looking at how do we digitize this, how do we use AI and cloud to automate. And a very telling example is our MSI algorithm that we built to detect colon cancer. The current gold standard is about 2 weeks in a lab. It goes through multiple people. There's lots of physical processes involved. We can do the equivalent in 3 minutes. And in fact, in the space of time that I've been speaking to you, we could have done the entirety of Ireland, and it would have been surprisingly cost effective. We would have just run millions at a time. We've tested it to 100,000 at a time. AWS handled it absolutely no problem. And also then, in terms of the practical stuff, we mentioned that pathologists need access to 1,000 terabytes and petabytes of data at a time. The current reality is they're passing around physical hard drives. They're losing data. They're struggling to find things. We can hold that data. We can make it highly available. And it means the pathologist can go through more cases, which means more patients can get more diagnosis. And of course, everything we do has to be regulated, governed, and all about patient safety. And we are an ISO 13485 certified company, so we've had external guidance on how we do machine learning, what our practices are, and that we are prioritizing patient safety and positive cancer outcomes. And I want to talk a bit about AWS and why we chose them. We're a very young startup. We're 5 to 6 years old, so we had a fresh chance to look at providers. And one of the big things that appealed to us was that AWS has a massive ecosystem. There's so many services that we can latch onto. And I think, as Jonah mentioned at the start of his speech, we're a small but ambitious team. We can't boil the ocean. We don't want to build things that we don't need to build. We want to build the things we care about. So, for example, we didn't need to build our own authentication system. We can use Cognito. We didn't need to build ways to manage certain infrastructure when we can use Athena, we can use Healthomics. This allows us to be really precious with our time. And it's ultimately why we compete against bigger companies, because we are picking the things that matter. Another key thing, as mentioned, is that we deploy across the world. So having a large cloud provider that has respected data centers where we can reliably ship out the same product is just fundamentally required. And the flexibility of AWS is also really useful. There's always 100 ways to do things. It gives us the freedom to build the things that we want. I also can't speak highly enough about the support we've had from Jonah and Sinan. We torture them regularly, and other members of the AWS team. We've had access to training for SageMaker. We've had beta access to Healthomics. It allows us to get a competitive head start. Whenever we're having trouble, we get product specialists brought in who can help us identify if our cybersecurity is up to spec. It can make sure that we're doing things the right way. It just allows us to move fast and build fast, which we have to do. We have no choice but to be moving quickly in the market. And in order to get to where we are today, we took advantage of AWS Activate in the early days. It gave us the ability to explore and create POCs and minimum viable products. It meant that we could afford to experiment and we could get something in front of customers. So it was really critical to our early business days. And in a similar vein, we can look at Marketplace as a way to see, do we need to build this or can we buy it? Can I take something off the shelf? Can I deal with this awkward customer request? Is this what Sonrai really wants to do? If not, let's just find it and slot it in, and that way we get to keep moving. We get to protect our roadmap, which again is just really important for a company of our size. And lastly, probably a fairly undervalued statement, AWS does tend to have really good documentation. We're constantly trying new things. We're hitting our heads against the wall. So being able to access blogs, videos, training material, it's the difference between meeting a deadline and not. So final slide from me, and I just want to talk about the future, and there's some things we've already pointed to. Health omics is probably the biggest focus for us this year. We've already got it up and running. We've had a lot of great support from the AWS team in that. As mentioned earlier, it's for handling bulky, raw data that tends to come from instruments. It's a really big problem to our customers. And in practice, you can be dealing with gigabytes of data that become terabytes when you're using it. We actually went through 3 different prototypes. It's still in the early days, but we went with AWS Batch originally, which is the most open source recommended route. And we had the exact same run cost $2,000, and Health Omics came in at $22. And that's because of things like there's omics compute, you're avoiding networking and data costs with NAT gateways. So there's lots of advantages, and there's also security and infrastructure benefits that we don't have to manage infrastructure. We can rely upon APIs, and it just makes our life easier. Thankfully, I don't have to explain foundation models because Emily gave a fantastic presentation on it. But this is something that Sonrai very much is wanting to double down on. Imaging is very complicated. I mentioned about the expensive issue with data storage and how the tile extraction is very computation intensive. That gives us now a foundation to build a foundation model. It means that we can potentially develop this as a way to rapidly build new cancer diagnosis algorithms and to make what we call multi-indicator based. So it could be that we can more easily identify other parts of cancer in the body, as well as allow our customers to build these things as well. And then last but not least, everyone on the planet has been talking about large language models. Sonrai has used them also to try and boost discovery. And we are working with our own clients to see about how we can link in APIs to Bedrock so that customers can basically get new drugs to market quicker. That's our purpose, is to constantly speed up, to reduce the barriers, overcome the technical hurdles. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass back to Jonah.
Jared, Matthew, absolutely incredible. Like, it's just seeing what you've achieved with the team is just brilliant. And every month I check in with you folks, like, it's a new story, and you've progressed something that may take a year. So really, really appreciate it. Definitely note that what Sonrai Analytics do extremely well is they really lean into the AWS managed services. So SageMaker, Lambda, Fargate, they're using that, and what that means is they can focus their time developing their own product and business needs and less time managing kind of infrastructure. So you can see that in the way they're going. Again, talked a little bit about the AI services. Check them out. There's loads of general ones. There's verticalized ones. There's a whole stack. You can easily find them on the AWS website. I have one final ask for the audience. It takes about 30 seconds. If you wouldn't mind scanning the QR code, it helps speakers such as myself, Jared and Matthew talk at these events. So would really appreciate the feedback from yourselves. It should only take 30 seconds. So on a final note, from a startup perspective, if anyone wants to get hands-on with some generative AI kind of workshops and things, we are running a generative AI workshop in Dublin on the 22nd of May, where you can bring yourself and a team, and we're going to build a generative AI chatbot. So if you want to get involved with that, come find me after the talk. And Jared, Matthew, and myself are going to be at the startup loft over there. So when you go out the door, turn right. We'll take any questions. If you have anything you want to learn from the two or myself, we'd be really happy to dive right in with those conversations. So we'll be there for about half an hour. Thank you so much for being a great audience.